So these reading and verbal processes with children are all important. Let us talk a little bit about socio-emotional development. Because we've been talking largely about cognitive development up to this point. Temperament is defined as a person's characteristic manner of behavior or reaction, right? So it could be laid back, uptight, and this can be largely under genetic control as a predisposition. Now, where it goes from there, obviously, we're talking about social and emotional development. Socialization has a large hand in the development of temperament as well. And socialization then is this lifelong process of shaping an individual's behavior, right? Patterns. And this includes values, standards to which one holds others and themselves, right? Skills, attitudes, motives. To conform in a way that is regarded as desirable in a particular society. So culture has a hand in dictating how this process will work. A couple of special ideas here. Theory of mind is the realization that others have their own representation of the world and that they can have dissimilar reactions to the same incidents, right, or the same stimuli. So again, people who don't achieve formal operations probably have a weak theory of mind or may have no theory of mind whatsoever. The important thing is with a theory of mind is to understand that you view the world perhaps differently than I do. And that doesn't invalidate either view, right? And it allows us then to engage in perspective taking because we realize there are different perspectives. So no guarantee that everyone will develop this. Now, more on social and emotional development, right? Most approaches to child rearing fall into one of the four styles, the parenting styles, and you've probably been exposed to this before. I'm not going to belabor it, but I do want to have us reflect on our parents' parenting styles, right? And this, if we're fortunate to live with both parents, right, or not, then they may have different styles, right? But how does that affect us? We might have multiple parents as part of a blended family, right? So just consider, as we discuss these, what was your parents' style, right? And what do you think your style is going to be? And the frightening aspect for many of us is that my style is probably going to be a lot like my parents' style because this is where I learned it, right? Where's the first line of education and learning how to parent? It's your own parents. So. And that's why I think it's important to be metacognitive about this, to think about it from these terms. It allows us the freedom to make adjustments perhaps and not just become our parents, so to speak. So authoritarian parents, they're typified by spare the rod, spoil the child, so nothing that a good ass whooping might fix, right? And authoritarian parents tend to be strict. They often have high standards, and they enforce them vigorously, right? Now, authoritative parents, and notice the close similarity to these two words, these parents will have high expectations as well, but they tend to be warm and supportive. Authoritarian parents are sometimes described as cold, and I don't know that I necessarily want to go there or not. I'm not in 100% agreement. But authoritative parents are warm and supportive, and authoritative parents like to explain. We're going to do this way because, right? That they want to lay out this explanation and make sure the child understands. Authoritarian parents, when they're kind of backed up against the wall, say, because I said so. And if you don't like it, maybe you need to bend over and we'll reinforce this on your butt, right? So, two different approaches there, and notice parents can also be a combination of styles. And their styles might be somewhat context dependent. Now, permissive parents are caring, but they believe that the children will learn from their own exploration, their own experiences, and their own mistakes, right? And sometimes they support the idea of the school of hard knocks, right? So permissive parents. And then finally, uninvolved parents. It could be because they're neglectful outright. They don't really care about parenting. They might be indifferent, right? Parenting was not their choice, but they might be busy. So sometimes, especially like when I was at Columbus State, you can imagine I had a lot of students who were in fact parents and single parents an awful lot of women, right, who'd had a child or two, and dad, if there was, skipped out, didn't hold up their end of the bargain, and now this woman is left with two children. She wants to create a better life for their children. There's some really inspiring stories that I was exposed to. But they work and they go to school and they take care of their children. And they don't get to spend as much time with their children as they would like because they're trying to build a future for their children that requires some sacrifice at this point in time. And they don't get a lot of help from society or the government. They're pretty much left to their own devices. So they're busy, and this turns into a certain level of neglect, but it's not by choice. It's for them by necessity. So I like to take a kind of broad-minded perspective when we use that term neglectful, because it doesn't necessarily mean intentional neglect. It sometimes means required neglect. Now, Lawrence Kohlberg, I'm a fan, and again, we've got stage development, but a stage theorist here, and what we're looking at then is the acquisition of morality and the building of a value system. And Kohlberg, we look at this and it maps onto Piaget pretty nicely as well in his stages. Phase one, infants, toddlers understand basically one thing, pleasure or pain. And in their world, the value good versus the value bad is tied to their experience of pleasure or pain with that stimulus object. Good stimulus objects yield pleasure. Bad stimulus objects yield pain. And that's about as sophisticated an analysis of good versus bad that they can muster. Now, I'm talking about infants to toddlers. Understand, though, that there's no guarantee that the 29-year-old that you just met out on the street has moved past this stage. So one thing that's really kind of different about the stages of moral reasoning is their age doesn't necessarily guarantee advance to another stage. So we have people, let's face it, there's people in government that, right, how do they assess whether it's right or wrong? Avoiding pain or getting caught is how they decide it, right? So they lie, they steal, they cheat, right? And as long as they believe they won't get caught, it's okay. Got to do what you got to do to get ahead, right? So they're now, if they want to interact and they want to do this with somebody else, right, they might then operate on a cost-benefit orientation or reciprocity. And this is achieve rewards or mutual benefits. So what's good? What's bad? What's good is what we agree on to do that will enhance our kind of position. So if we want to, make dirty deals behind the scenes in such a way, hey, that's okay, that's moral, that's the way business is done. And it's all good as long as we don't get caught, right? And we achieve the rewards. So all bets are off. These are people who are not guided by what we consider higher level morality. And you'll find these people in all locations of government, right? So age, disconnect age from socio-emotional development or moral reasoning. Now, conventional morality, and this is where Kohlberg says most of us land is in kind of phase two, which is stage 3 or stage 4, the good child orientation. And notice that children who are like 7 or 8 years old, right, they can usually be effectively manipulated by saying, you do that so you can be daddy's good boy, or clean your rooms and show me your daddy's good little girl. And the child will do this to gain favor. Notice, cleaning the room, it's not a question of whether it's right or wrong or good or bad to the child. It's a mechanism to gain favor, to gain approval. And a lot of people never advance past this stage, right? It would be cool if we had numbers, kind of percentages of the population. But I'm sure you know many adults that what's right or wrong is what gets them recognition versus what doesn't. Now, stage 4, Kohlberg says, I think the majority of people kind of hit this stage. This is us just kind of law and order orientation, and we follow the rules. We follow the rules and we avoid penalties, right? And we have this idea that the world will work better because the rules are there for a reason, and they were created for a reason. And as long as we follow them, then we avoid sanction, and it's all good. So right and wrong is a system essentially of laws. And we obey the laws because laws are in place to make society function properly. And so most of us kind of hang out at this stage, right? And notice you can run a society very successfully if the majority of your people operate at this stage. Now, post-conventional principled morality. Now we get into an area where people start thinking about each other, they start thinking about the world, and they begin to operate at a more conceptual level. So the social contract orientation is promote the welfare of one society. And when we see John F. Kennedy in his inauguration say, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, what we're talking about is engaging in the American dream, this process that ensures freedom. And especially in Kennedy's context, when we're talking about totalitarian communist regimes that are on the rise throughout the globe and kind of represent our nemesis. So now, being born as an American citizen, right, I then engage in the social contract that's been thrust on me. You know, when I was born, no one ever said, hey, Mark, you're born. Do you want to be an American citizen? No, that's already happened because I was born here. And do you agree to obey the laws or not? And it's like, you better agree to obey the laws because you know, this is when we accept our place and we move ahead of that to ensure kind of a continuous improvement of the welfare of the people in our society. A lot of you guys, myself included, we're down with this sometimes. We might not be there all the time, but this is us on our good days, right? But then what about ethical principle orientation? And this is when we achieve justice, we be consistent with one's principles in an effort to avoid self-condemnation, to avoid guilt and anxiety as a result of it. So who's this wacky looking guy over here? That's Henry David Thoreau. And Henry David Thoreau, for example, he didn't want to pay taxes. So when they started income tax, he says, you know, taxation is wrong. And taxation is stealing my money. It's the government actually telling me that they're entitled to my money when I'm not. And so Henry David Thoreau wouldn't pay taxes. He didn't pay taxes. But here's the deal. He was upfront about it. He said, I'm not paying taxes. Taxes are a crime against people. It's a crime against the individual. And they said, Henry David Thoreau, if you don't pay your taxes, you are going to go to jail. And they said, let's go. And he went. Right? Because he's not going to try and sneak. He's not going to try and cheat. His principle is that taxation is theft. And he will stand up, puff out his chest, and say, I will not participate in this. And I will willingly take the price for my non-participation. Notice this is a lot different than many people in government and in business who cheat and sneak and try to avoid their taxes. They're back at about stage 2, right? Thoreau is not paying taxes, but he's at stage 6. Thoreau also was instrumental in the abolitionist movement. He felt that in no way is it acceptable to enslave another person. I don't care what the law says. The law is wrong. There is a moral law, a higher law that transcends the legal law that says enslaving another person is inhumane. So he participated in the abolitionist movement. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, let's go to the other side of the screen. Same thing. He says, hey, you know, the principle is that one people cannot be enslaved or be the victims of another government. So he's telling the British, screw you. India deserves its independence. It's not a colony of Great Britain. That is wrong, right? And then Dr. King. And we know with Dr. King was a student of Thoreau and Gandhi. He studied them both. And you can see, I love this picture because it's got the picture of Gandhi up there looking at Dr. King. And Dr. King said, look, here's the deal. Laws that are unjust must be protested. You can't then, and laws that are unjust. So just because it's a law for a stage 4 person doesn't mean that it's just and it should be followed. So stage 6, man, this is kind of the pinnacle, and it's a tough one, and many of us might flirt with it a little bit, but it's hard to live one's life there in its entirety, and that's why we look at people like Thoreau and Dr. King and Gandhi, and we admire them for their courage and their willingness to take the blows for their behavior. Right? So, Kohlberg's stage of moral reasoning. Well, here's the deal. According to Carol Gilligan, the culture and morality, well, Kohlberg is saying stage order appears consistent in most cultures, so it's kind of a reliable measure in that regard. Stage 5 and 6 occur only in cultures with higher verbal ability, formal education, and the luxury of being able to consider this level of abstraction. And now we get kind of this white male Western view of the world, right? Carol Gilligan says, Kohlberg, you're putting down people in less developed countries. You're putting down women. You say, hey, we don't find many women at stage 5 or 6. And Carol Gilligan says, look, societies impose different standards on different people within the society. So she comes at Kohlberg vehemently, right, kind of from a gender and morality point of view. She took issue with Kohlberg and said women have very different culturally imposed motives that center around relationships and caring for others. And we get to this issue of thinking in terms of, is it wrong for a woman to steal food to feed her starving child? No lofty explanations or philosophical perspectives needed here. My child is starving. My number one responsibility is to rear and nurture and keep my child safe. Yes, I will take food if it prevents my child from starving to death. So, from a cultural point of view, Gilligan's going, look, Kohlberg's idea is sweet for men in white Western societies, but many of us in the world have very different contexts in which we have to adjust to. So we need to look at this with some level of flexibility. So point, counterpoint, right? While men represent powerful activity as assertion and aggression, women, in contrast, portray acts of nurturance as acts of strength. And let's face it, I'm going to go back to Karen Horney. We talked about Karen Horney in the personality lecture. And, she said that penis envy is bullshit. And think about it. Is the push for men to be creative creation envy because it's women who possess the ultimate creative ability, and that is to create another human being? Would it be that all the skyscrapers and all the bridges and all the other stuff, the dams that men have built, is just a manifestation of their creation envy? Let's flip this shit around, right? So, next adjustment arena, what do you think it might be? Notice we're kind of moving along in time here. Let's talk college. Boy, do I miss this view. This is the view out my window of the psychology building. And I haven't been there since, before spring break. That's weird to think about. I miss campus, but I understand we got to do what we got to do. Cognitive development and early adulthood, what do we got? Piaget suggested that each stage of cognitive development, people think qualitatively different way, as I suggested. He believed that the formal operation stage, 11 to 15, is the highest stage of thinking. Adults gain knowledge, but essentially think in the same way as they did as adolescents. And there's some pretty good evidence of this for people who study IQ, intelligence quotient, right? The mental age of the average American is 15 years old. So once you norm for age group, most Americans operate on an IQ test as a 15-year-old if we divorce them of their chronological age, right? George Takei finds that just fascinating there. So when you go about your day-to-day business, two things to consider about intelligence. As we go about our world, as we move about our world, that most people are operating as they did at 15 and not progressed since then. Also, something else to consider about IQ is half the people on the planet have below average intelligence. By definition. Now, what meaning you take from that and how you apply it, that's kind of up to you. But that's what the numbers mean, right? So think about it. Adapting to college, going from being a senior in high school to being a freshman in college brings a lot of changes. You guys could develop a laundry list. You're really in touch with it. Special challenges face students who are returning students, students who either didn't go to college right out of high school or went to college, dropped out, and now have returned. We see a lot less of that at Ohio State, although it's becoming more common. We see a whole bunch of that at Columbus State, right? And I was one of those people as well. I didn't really get serious about college till I was about 36 years old. I like to call myself a late bloomer, but we could think of other names and descriptors if we so choose. So, adjustment strategies for returning students. Develop strategies to cope with the new environment. Connect with your campus in the ways that are meaningful and useful to you. Get to know other students, which is invaluable, and share their experiences. And there's typically a lot of support services that are available to us. Let's end part 2 here because we're going to come back and hang out in your little party. For most of you is early adulthood.